All right, I just want to say a quick welcome to you all. We're going to get started in just one moment. We're going to get started at 8:04. So if you're just joining us now, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function here. It's going to stay open throughout the debate. But if you have any questions about any logistics or anything like that, please send them there. We won't be taking any community questions at this time to ask our candidates, but we will have the chat open in case you run into any technical difficulties. But with that said, I'm going to start off with some quick housekeeping. So the first thing for our audience members is to make sure that you are in gallery mode. This is the best way to view all of our candidates at the same time. I think all of our candidates are going to be keeping their cameras on to replicate a real life debate. Not that this isn't real life, but if we were in person. So if you need help doing that, you can change your view setting by clicking the top right corner of the Zoom window and changing it from speaker to gallery. It also helps to be in full screen so you can see the candidates clearly throughout the call. Please note that we have closed captioning for this webinar. You do not have the option to turn it off, just to make sure that all people can access this. The debate is now being recorded and it will be shared through the HEN website and the HEN YouTube channel. So we'll make sure that they are publicly accessible to watch our social media channels, which we'll include at the end of the debate for more information on this. Lastly, you will see a timekeeper on your screen. Mara is our lovely timekeeper for this evening. She'll be holding up a yellow card for 30 seconds when the candidate has 30 seconds left, and then a red card for when their time is up. This will help our candidates stay on track. With that being said, I will pass it along to Diane.
Thank you. Welcome everyone tonight to tonight's all-candidate debate incorporating GreenPAC's nationwide 100 debates on the environment for the riding of Wellington Halton Hills. We'd like to thank all candidates here this evening. Let us begin this evening by acknowledging that in this riding, we are gathered on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee peoples, who have all stewarded these lands and waterways for millennia. Our gratitude. This evening is presented to you by a three-way partnership. First, the Halton Hills Public Library has promoted the event and is represented tonight by their Adult Services Librarian, Danielle Daw. Danielle?
Thank you very much, Diane. As Diane just said, I'm Danielle. I'm the Adult Services Librarian with the Halton Hills Public Library. And it is my pleasure just to welcome everyone to tonight's event. So libraries are big supporters of lifelong learning and access to information. So it is absolutely fantastic to see we've got all our candidates, we've got our community groups, and we have all of you, the residents, participating tonight. So it's fantastic to see everyone. And with that, I will pass it back to Diane.
Thank you. Second partner, the Halton Environmental Network, or HEN, has provided the virtual platform, marketing, and a moderator for the GreenPAC 100 debates on the environment interface. They have been coordinating similar events across our region tonight. HEN is a nonprofit organization operating in Halton region since 2004 to support and enhance the capacity for local climate action and environmental sustainability by bringing together relevant parties to drive change and facilitate communication, cooperation, and alignment among them. Third is the Canadian Federation of University Women Georgetown, with its long history in the community of offering an all-candidates forum for aspirants to answer questions directly from the public. My name is Diane McDermott, and I am president of CFUW Georgetown, one of 96 such clubs nationwide that has as its mission gender equality, human rights, and social justice. And a degree is not required. Well, CFUW is non-partisan. That doesn't mean we are non-political. Our members are deeply engaged in advocacy and raising awareness. Proudly celebrating our club's 50th anniversary with events all this year. We invite you to Google us for more information. In format, there are two moderators this evening. We lead first with the environment questions from GreenPAC and HACEN as part of the 100 debates, break for a rapid fire question period, an audience poll, followed by other issues of community concern. These questions moderated by our club's own experienced and very able Margaret Teasdale. We will conclude with closing statements from our candidates. It is now my pleasure to introduce our Halton Environment Network partner, Gemma Patey, formally. Gemma is in her final year of her undergraduate degree at Carleton University, where she studies global politics. Gemma grew up in Halton Hills and spends her time between Ottawa and Georgetown. She has a deep passion for getting young people involved in politics, especially regarding climate change and the environment. Gemma will guide our questions on the environment for this evening. Gemma, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Diane. So before I begin, I would like to introduce the order of candidates for tonight. So the order of our candidates was chosen just prior to this debate commencing. And so all candidates were invited. Today, we do have 4 from our community. So the order for tonight will be Melanie Lang, Michael Chong, Ran Zhu, and Noor Jahangir. All right. To begin, I would like to ask all candidates to start us off with an introductory statement. You will have 1 minute to give this statement. Melanie, the time is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for logging in this evening. I'm Melanie Lang, and I'm your Liberal candidate in this election. My husband, Paul, and I have 2 daughters, one who's just left for university and one in grade 11. We've lived in Fergus for more than 15 years now. I'm from a small rural community in Western Quebec, and one of the values instilled in me from an early age is service to others. This has guided my career, my volunteer work in the area, and it's what's driving me to run for office now. One of the reasons I'm running as a Liberal is because of the party's record on climate change to date. And as for next, numerous experts agree we've put forward the most effective and affordable plan. Climate should not be a partisan issue. And as your MP, I'll support ideas and collaborations that bring us closer to a cleaner, more sustainable Canada. We know we can't turn back the clock on climate change. And I think we can all agree that our kids and our future generations are depending on us to get it right. So I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Michael, you now have 1 minute.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'd like to thank the Halton Environmental Network, Halton Hills Public Library, GreenPAC, and the Georgetown Federation of University Women for organizing tonight's debate. I hope to be your environmental choice in this election. Last election, just 2 years ago, I was endorsed by GreenPAC, one of the several dozen candidates across the country endorsed for their environmental leadership. And just several days ago, renowned Canadian environmentalist David Suzuki endorsed me as an environmental candidate, one of only 6 candidates he's endorsed in this federal election. I've worked with David Suzuki on a number of issues, and I'm committed to continuing this work. You can find his endorsement online if you Google his and my name. Once again, thank you for coming tonight, and I look forward to tonight's debate.
Thank you, Michael. Ran, you now have 1 minute.
Hi, I'm Ran Drew, Green Party candidate. Thank you to all the organizers and attendees. I'm first going to address my age, since everybody asks me at the doors. I'm 27 and I bring a lot of experience to the table. I did my co-op placement with the Green Party in high school, and I've worked on virtually every provincial and federal election. And after my double major in economics and theater, I started working for a Liberal parliamentary assistant to infrastructure in the Ontario legislature. And for the last 3 years, I was the constituency coordinator for Mike Schreiner, Guelph MPP and leader of the Green Party of Ontario. I've seen Greens get elected. I've been part of doing politics differently, and I'm ready to be part of the Green Wave in Wellington, Halton Hills. To those that say I'm an anomaly in politics, I'm not. In fact, I'm not young enough. I had the courage to put my name forward because climate change is here and we need to take bold action to combat it. We need to challenge the old political status quo and to protect the planet I'll be living in, our children will be living in the next 20, 40, 60 years. The environment is our party's anchor, and it goes hand in hand with housing, with economy, and our children and seniors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ran. All right, and lastly, we have Noor. Noor, you have 1 minute.
Hello, everyone. I'm Noor Jahangir, your NDP candidate in Wellington Halton Hills. On September 20th, you have a choice between the parties that have broken one promise after another, time and time again. On voting for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, who are fighting for you, you have a better choice. In every corner of the country, families are worried about jobs, the health of our loved ones, the climate crisis, and the public services that everyone counts on. Thanks to the decisions of Liberal and Conservative government, many of those supports that we rely on were just not there when we needed them. If we want different results, we need to make different choices. And that's why I'm your federal NDP candidate for Wellington Halton Hills.
Thank you, Noor. All right, that concludes our introductory statements. So we'll now go into question number 1. COVID-19 has showcased how interconnected global crises can be. It has shown how vulnerable our world can be, how people are affected by crises differently, and how the populations can adapt and work together to protect the common good. With so much learned from addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, what lessons do you believe we should apply to the climate crisis, and how would you follow through with them if elected? Our first candidate is Michael. Michael, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you for the question. What the pandemic has made clear is the interconnected nature of our world today. Economically, supply chains are interconnected around the world. From a public health point of view, viruses know no borders and are blind to race, religion, or creed. On a range of policy issues, such as the environment, the pandemic has made clear the need to cooperate with other countries in order to protect our citizens. But the pandemic has also made clear that we can no longer rely on cooperation from authoritarian states like China to secure the safety of our citizens. So the lessons of the pandemic are that we have to work more closely with like-minded democratic allies and partners. And we have to acknowledge the very real threats coming from authoritarian governments like those in China. On climate change, I think we should do this by linking Canada's industrial carbon price to that of our biggest democratic trading partners in the European Union and the United States. We're proposing to work more closely with the Biden administration to ensure minimum North American standards for key industrial sectors, backed up by border carbon adjustments to prevent the leakage of emissions and jobs to countries with lower environmental and emission standards like China. This will allow us to move toward our Paris goals in step with our European and American allies, while at the same time protecting trade-exposed sectors here at home and reducing the risk of shifting jobs from Canada to more polluting countries like China. And so that's how I think the pandemic has taught us these lessons, and I think these are the lessons we can take from the pandemic and apply to future collaboration with democratic allies and partners throughout Europe and the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Ran. You have 2 minutes.
So on the climate crisis, I first want to give a shout out to Halton Hills. It is striking that in 2019, our town of Halton Hills passed a climate emergency resolution with a goal of net zero GHG emissions by 2030. They're proposing to retrofit buildings, move to a fleet of electric vehicles for the town, and have multiple charging stations around Halton Hills for electric car owners. So I first want to say how glad I am that Halton Hills is leading the country by setting such a strong example for the country. And it goes to show that municipalities and businesses are just as interested and important when it comes to the federal government's effort to address climate change. And I'm ready to work collaboratively on this. And COVID is a reminder of these important collaborations. Despite exposing our vulnerabilities, it also exposed that people come together even when they're physically apart, like we are now. Having worked for MPP Mike Schreiner during the pandemic, I've seen businesses come together. I've seen different levels of government work together, and there's no reason why the House of Commons can't either. We all care about each other, and COVID has taught us that. And despite all the partisanship in our parliament, I think people forget that all parties have the same goal. We want to help people. So the biggest lesson for me that I can apply to the climate crisis is doing politics positively, work across party lines, know that we have partners in this fight. Just look at our own municipal government in Halton Hills, for example. Thank you so much for asking the question.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Noor. Noor, you now have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for the question. The terrifying scenes of Lytton, British Columbia serve as a reminder that the climate crisis is real and it's here. Its effects are catastrophically impacting lives and livelihoods. Canadians have been doing their part to fight an urgent public health emergency, but we need to tackle climate change right now. We need a government that approaches the climate emergency with the same sense of urgency. A new Democrat government will declare a climate emergency, and unlike the Liberals, we will back that declaration up with urgent action now. The new Democrats fought for you during the pandemic, and we got results. We're going to fight the climate crisis like we want to win. It's important, and it needs action now. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Next up, we have Melanie. Melanie, you now have 2 minutes.
Thank you. As a society, we've learned a lot through this pandemic, but one thing that stood out for me was that the federal government was there to support us when we needed it most. The Liberals introduced a wide range of financial supports for workers, businesses, large and small, parents, and other individuals. The Liberals also made huge transfer payments to the provinces to support schools and hospitals. And to fight the virus itself, the federal government's vaccine strategy positioned us as a world leader in both supply and percentage of population vaccinated. From the beginning, the Liberal Party has taken climate change seriously. Carbon pollution is no longer free in Canada, and we've invested $100 billion in climate action and green initiatives in just 6 years. Our plan is to fund climate change adaptation measures and projects that would reduce emissions and make our homes and infrastructure stronger. That includes things like our new Greener Homes Grant, rebates for electric vehicles, funding more charging stations, all of which will get us to net zero by 2050. Experts have ranked the Liberal platform even higher than those of the NDP or the Greens. And the Globe and Mail put it best when it said that there's a large green gap between our plan and the Conservatives. But aside from all of those, what has attracted me the most to the Liberals personally was not just the plan, but the will to carry it out. They have shown that for 6 years, they followed through on helping Canadians during the pandemic. And as a Liberal, I'm confident they'll follow through on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That concludes our first question. We're now going to move on to question number 2. In Canada and around the world, we have seen fires, extreme weather, droughts, infrastructure challenges, and more. The effects of climate change cannot be denied, all while our greenhouse gas emissions are still rising in Canada. How will you ensure we accelerate climate change mitigation, build resilient communities, and implement rapid, tangible solutions that include a just recovery for all Canadians? First up, we have Ran. You have 2 minutes.
So I know we're all talking about it tonight. To all the parties, climate plan, as a young person, I have to say, not good enough. The Greens will slash greenhouse gas emissions by 60% below 2005 levels by 2030, using an annual carbon tax increase of $25 a year. We will create a clear and enforceable target and timeline by 2023. This is realistic. It's what scientists tell us we need to do, and it's the most reduction out of all 4 major parties. We will also invest in affordable housing projects built at optimal density so that farmland and nature can be protected while reducing urban sprawl. In Wellington, Halton Hills, that's a big issue as we have a lot of farmland. If elected, we will also cancel pipeline projects. Good climate leaders do not build pipelines. We will ban fracking and slap tariffs on imports from countries with weak climate policies. We will also eliminate subsidies for the fossil fuel sector and require federal public investment funds to divest from that industry. These are our tax dollars that the Liberal government is spending. We're promising a detailed carbon budget to keep GHG emissions within the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. Now, does that mean oil and gas workers will no longer have jobs, like some people say? No, those people are alarmists. The Green Party cares about a just transition. In fact, in a recent survey conducted by worker-led advocacy group Iron and Earth, a majority of oil, gas, and coal workers want climate solutions that create net zero energy jobs. We're looking forward to implementing job training programs to transition the sector into a long-term, sustainable, and clean industry. That's real climate leadership, and the Green Party is there to do that.
Thank you, Ran. Next up, we have Noor. You now have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for the question. The climate crisis, the climate emergency, is putting everything we value at risk. Conservatives say that the climate crisis isn't real, and the Liberals just act like it isn't. Mr. Trudeau declares a climate emergency and approves a pipeline immediately right after. He pretends to be a climate leader, but he gives oil billions in subsidies. Consecutive Liberal and conservative governments have continuously failed to meaningfully tackle the climate crisis. Justin Trudeau has missed every single climate target that has been set, has presided over the worst greenhouse gas reduction efforts in the G7, and has failed to reduce emissions. Under Trudeau, we have the weakest 2030 climate target out of any G7 country. Public funds are best spent supporting the transition to renewable energy rather than on profitable oil and gas companies. We will fulfill Canada's G20 commitment to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and redirect these funds to building a more sustainable future. And we will eliminate loopholes that let big polluters off the hook. The NDP is committed to taking climate leadership and getting to net zero. We commit to creating hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs by investing in clean energy, energy-efficient, affordable homes, electric transit, and zero-emission vehicles. We need to start acting like the climate crisis exists now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noor. Next up, we have Melanie. Melanie, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks so much. So we know that extreme weather events are going to be more common in the decades ahead, which is why we need to have a plan in place to support communities affected by them. We're pushing hard to get to net zero emissions by 2050, and the Liberal plan includes a wide range of measures to blunt the effects of extreme weather. No government has done more on protection and conservation. We will train 1,000 new community firefighters and work with province to give them gear that they need. We also plan to include Indigenous fire crews in our strategy, respecting their traditional knowledge and expertise. Flooding due to climate change is also going to be a challenge, and our plan includes several measures specifically to prepare for it. We will complete mapping of risk zones and make sure Canadians have access to that data before they move or build. We will also develop a low-cost national flood insurance program for people who live in those risk zones. Beyond just preparing for damaging weather as a society, we will have to take both emissions and resilience into account anytime we build new homes and infrastructure. Our communities here in Wellington, Halton Hills continue to grow, and we want to support them to make sure they have what they need to adapt sustainably. Under our plan, homeowners will be eligible for up to $5,000 under our Greener Homes grant, and I'll work with municipalities across the riding to secure funding for green municipal infrastructure. I know there's a lot of work to do to tackle climate change. It's the biggest challenge of our time, and the Liberal Party will continue to have your backs.
Thank you, Melanie. And lastly, we have Michael. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Gemma, for the question. I think we need to be honest with ourselves about Canada's record on greenhouse gas emissions. Canada is now one of the highest per capita emitters in the world. And according to some reports, we are the highest per capita emitter in the world, even higher in the developed world, even higher than in the United States. The fact of the matter is that emissions have risen each and every year for the last several years. Just several months ago, Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson released the latest data for Canada's emissions for the year ending December 31st, 2019. The data shows that once again, Canada's emissions have increased. They now stand at 730 megatons, a 22 megaton increase from 2016 when they stood at 708 megatons. And there's no sign that our emissions are going down this year or in 2022. In fact, on the current track we are on, they will go up. The previous Conservative government failed to meet the Kyoto Protocol target. The current government has failed to meet the Copenhagen Accord target, and there's no evidence that we're going to meet the Paris Accord target. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to get away from the rhetoric and from making grandiose promises about even more ambitious targets and instead focus on the difficult work that is needed to reduce emissions to meet the goals that we have already committed to in international agreements. A frank, honest approach is how I will ensure that we will do a better job on mitigation, on building resilient communities, on implementing rapid, tangible solutions to reduce emissions and meet the challenge of climate change. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Michael. That concludes our second question of the night. And now we go into rapid fire questions. So as we are meeting in a virtual space, we are going to be having a new kind of feature to liven up our debates and to ask our candidates a broad range of questions that they have to give snap answers to. So what is going to happen is that all candidates will answer a question simultaneously by either giving a thumbs up, meaning yes, or a thumbs down, meaning no. For this part, I would really like to encourage our audience to make sure that you can see all the candidates on your screen at the same time by switching from speaker view to gallery view. We are going to have 15 seconds as an answer. So after I finish my first question, candidates will have 10 seconds to think of what their answer would be, and then 5 seconds to hold a thumbs up or thumbs down. You can put your thumb up or thumb down at whatever point in those 15 seconds, but please ensure it stays up as long as possible. Are there any questions before we begin? Okay. Amazing. So our first question, will you join the All-Party Climate Caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle to address climate change through policy? Thank you very much. You can now lower your hands. Second question. Do you support the construction of further oil and natural gas pipelines? Thank you. You can now lower your hands. Third question. Greenland has recently prohibited all oil exploration off of its shores. Should Canada do the same? You can now lower your hands. Fourth question. Will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels? You can now lower your hands. And our last rapid fire question. Will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2020? Whoa, sorry, 2030. Let me redo that. Let me redo that question. My apologies. Will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030? Thank you. You can now lower your hands. That concludes our rapid fire questions for this evening. I'm now going to pass it along to Margaret for some more questions.
Good evening. As Gemma said, I'm Margaret Teasdale from CFUW Georgetown. And now it's time for the questions not necessarily pertaining to the environment, but nonetheless very important. And the next two questions are from CFUW Georgetown. The first question is in regards to Indigenous people's rights. And the question is, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women experience some of the highest rates of poverty and violence while attaining the lowest levels of education. How will you address the root causes of inequity, poverty, and violence experienced by Indigenous women and girls? And I believe we're supposed to start with Noor, if I followed it correctly. Yes, okay.
Thank you so much for your question. The Liberals have failed Indigenous people time and time again. Canada's relationship with Indigenous people and community has been deeply troubled. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals talk about how reconciliation and promises to respect Indigenous rights, but instead they spend millions of dollars fighting First Nation kids in court. They promise clean drinking water, but only deliver more delays. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are committed to true nation-to-nation relationship, reconciliation, recognition of Indigenous rights, and equal funding. And under our plan, we will commit to safe housing, clean drinking water now, respectful safe access to healthcare, and ending the underfunding of Indigenous children's services among Indigenous communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noor. And next is Melanie. You're muted, Melanie.
Thank you. So thank you for the question. So you did highlight certainly some, many of the categories of individuals who have been greatly affected and marginalized. And the pandemic highlighted and brought awareness to where those gaps were, where those cracks were within our system. We have, when we look at recovery, and ensuring that it's an inclusive plan forward, we need to ensure that we have recovered 92% of jobs in Canada, and comparatively 75% to the US. Within that group of people, we need to also look at the race, socioeconomic status, exposure to environmental risks, those individuals who are working in jobs that may not have the measures in place to ensure their health and well-being. We would also look to protect workers by advancing Canada's first just transition legislation to support local and regional economic diversification strategies for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador in collaboration with local workers and educational institutions, investors, Indigenous peoples. And so the online, you can actually find within our plan that we have a place to ensure that the diversity of the individuals that live here in Canada are all included and taken into consideration. And one way in doing that would be an example of our $10 a day childcare, which is a way to ensure that more women are able to return to the workforce and are feeling supported, as a way to lift families out of poverty. And it's not just about the number of daycare places, but it's ensuring that we have the standardized level of care and nutrition programs for those children, which is also creating home-based businesses for individuals who want to create more of those home day cares, which statistically we know is women who are running those types of home-based businesses. So there is a program in place to recognize that need, and we look forward to seeing that through.
Thank you, Melanie. And next we have Michael.
Well, thanks, Margaret, for this very important question. I think Canadians in the last several years and the last several months have been shocked by the revelation that was revealed through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, through the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, and into the discovery of the unmarked graves at the sites of former residential schools. It's a reminder, a heartbreaking reminder of the pain that Indigenous peoples have suffered for too long. While the path to reconciliation is difficult, we have to continue to work together to make amends for past injustices. And so to that end, we are committed to continuing to fulfill and implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, and particularly calls 71 through 76, which deal with the residential schools fallout of unmarked graves and children that were abused. We are committed to continuing to build a relationship with Indigenous peoples that respects their treaty rights, their constitutional rights in this country by looking at new models of governance in order to ensure that they receive the services on reserve, educational services, water treatment services, wastewater treatment services that address some of the longstanding boiled water advisories that have been outstanding for some years now, and that ensures that the next generation of kids that are educated on reserve achieve the highest possible standards for education and for outcomes. And so these are just some of the things that we are proposing to do, building on the work of the past government, the current government, in order to address our collective responsibility to deal with these past and current injustices. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Michael. And now we will hear from Ran.
We have so much to learn from the Indigenous people in terms of their ecological wisdom and their philosophies. And we are in mourning over the events that has happened in the past year and throughout history. We wouldn't have to ask this question if our current government has done a good job. We would fund Indigenous healing centers to address the trauma of residential schools and provide funding to work on missing children and unmarked burials. We would call on the Pope to apologize for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools, improve First Nations child welfare, and end the current ruling government's legal fight over the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling. It's not reconciliation if our current government is taking people to court. The Green Party has also been calling for universal basic income that will benefit all members of our society. This will reduce the root risk of Indigenous women and children and empower all of us to have the dignity to navigate through life. Thank you so much for asking this necessary question.
Thank you, Ran. And now we're on to our second question from CFUW Georgetown, and that one's in regards to long-term care. Do you support the public provision of long-term care? How do you view the roles of municipal, provincial, and federal governments in caring for our country's most vulnerable? And this time we start with Melanie.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, absolutely. Again, reflecting back on this past number of months, we saw significant gaps where we needed to have attention and investments being put into place. That includes on provisions to ventilation. It includes training and access to resources as support staff, public support workers, personal support workers. It also includes looking at the role around nutrition and availability to medical care for these individuals that are living in long-term home situations. There is a need to have national long-term care standards. That is something I'm sure we can all agree to. And this is important regardless of the small rural communities or growing cities that Canadians live in. There is a minimum standard of care that is needed and is required so that people can live out the rest of their lives in dignity, and that families can feel secure knowing that their loved ones are being taken care of. The other point I would like to make with this is regards to the basic income, is that if we also have a standardized and basic income, this increases the Canadians' ability to make choices that they feel is in line with their loved ones' wishes and to care to that level of care that they need to be provided with, as opposed to perhaps making decisions solely based on what limited resources they may have available to them. So increasing individuals, Canadians' ability to their basic income levels that allows them to have more freedom of choice and spending power, coupled along with national standards in long-term care, will allow Canadians to the government to work with the provinces as we go forward to ensure that our citizens are being looked after. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And next we will hear from Michael.
Thank you, Margaret, for the question. It's an important one. Provinces like Ontario have a blend of private and public delivery of publicly funded services when it comes to long-term care facilities. Our view is that in a country so large with so many different regions, 2 official languages, that it's really important to work with the provinces to support them in the delivery of long-term care beds and long-term care facilities. Clearly, the pandemic has revealed the vulnerabilities of these long-term care facilities. Too often, vulnerable seniors were left in precarious conditions. Too often, too many of them died because of a lack of support. And so to that end, we believe that the federal government should convene a meeting with the premiers within the first 100 days of the next government to propose a new health agreement with the provinces and territories that boosts the annual growth rate of the Canada Health Transfer from the federal government to the provinces to at least 6% per annum. We believe that this additional money will inject some $60 billion into our healthcare system over the next 10 years and will allow provinces to plan out improvements to their delivery of long-term care beds over the next decade. So that's what we believe is the right approach in a federation so diverse and so large as ours, where the provinces have different ways of delivering these long-term care beds. In Ontario, our home province, we believe that our approach will ensure that we lift the standards at these long-term care facilities while allowing the provinces the flexibility to deliver health care as is appropriate to the particular province. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Michael. And next we have Ran.
Thank you so much. In the past year, working for MPP Mike Schreiner's office during the pandemic, I've seen firsthand from phone calls and casework that the provincial Conservative government has failed us. Seniors should live in dignity, and I'm ready to address that on the federal level. The Greens want long-term care to be brought into the Canada Health Act, and we want to categorically eliminate the for-profit model in the long run. We are also promising that stricter enforcement of national healthcare standards, including the potential of criminal prosecution for those found to be breaking rules. We also want working conditions improved so care workers can get paid sick leave and improve training. We also want to improve care in the community to allow more seniors to be cared for at home, because a lot of seniors do want that. I've talked to enough seniors through my constituency work to be a strong advocate for Canada's long-term care, and I'm ready to get to work. So thank you so much for asking that question.
Thank you, Ran. And next we will hear from Noor.
Hi, thank you so much for asking that question. Profit should never be the bottom line when it comes to our seniors. Canadians were horrified to see the conditions in our long-term care homes during the pandemic. Justin Trudeau teamed up with Aaron O'Toole and voted against taking profit out of long-term care. Justin Trudeau has underfunded healthcare and prioritized the profits of big corporations and their wealthy shareholders. It's time to take profit out of long-term care. New Democrats will end for-profit delivery and bring long-term care homes under the public umbrella. We'll introduce a care guarantee for seniors, including national standards for care and working conditions in long-term care homes. In the first wave of the pandemic, over 80% of COVID-19 deaths in Canada happened in long-term care facilities. The Liberals gave out millions in subsidies to private long-term care homes that turned around and paid out millions in dividends and CEO bonuses. Canada has suffered the worst record among industrialized countries for COVID-19 deaths in long-term care homes. We need change, and it needs to happen now. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. And now I will turn the screen over to Gemma.
Thank you very much, Margaret. All right, so now we get to utilize another Zoom feature and get to engage our audience a little bit more. So we would like to hear from you. For the past week, we've had a Dropbox open for the community to submit questions that they want to hear from our candidates. On the screen, you will soon see a live poll. Please select your top 2 questions that you would like the candidates to answer. I believe Georgia, who is one of our staff members here, is sharing it right now. So you should be able to see a poll pop up on your screen. Additionally, on the screen, you should be able to see the questions a little bit larger in case you need that. So please take 2 minutes to select your top 2 questions. And then from there, we will give 2 minutes as a little break. So we'll be coming back at 8:52 to have our first question from the community. So please take this break to do whatever you need to do. We'll give 30 more seconds just in case you haven't submitted your answers. All right, if folks want to come on back to their screens again, we'll get ready to ask our next question. All right. So thank you everyone in our audience for taking the time to select what question they want to hear the most from our candidates. The answers are now in. I will be asking the first question and Margaret will be asking the second question. So our first question will be, so candidates will have 2 minutes to answer this one again. And our first question is, what immediate actions will you take to address the climate emergency? Michael, you are our first candidate. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Gemma, for the question. Sorry, I was on mute earlier and I think I coughed over somebody, so my apologies about that. The immediate action I will take if I have the privilege of being reelected to represent the good people of Wellington, Halton Hills is to urge my colleagues in Ottawa to work much more closely with our democratic allies and partners, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union in order to set a price on carbon that is consistent across North America and the European Union and the UK, as well as working toward carbon border adjustments to ensure that this large trading zone is insulated from unfair trade competition from jurisdictions like China, where their environmental standards and emissions policies aren't as strict as ours, because I believe strongly that we need to act on climate change, but at the same time, we need to do it in a way that ensures that trade exposed industries, that our jobs here at home aren't simply exported to places where there is a lower price on carbon and to places where there aren't the same environmental standards. So I think that is something that we should be working on immediately, because I think there is ground to move with the new Biden administration and grounds to move with the European Union and the United Kingdom on this file. I'll rejoin the Climate Change Caucus, the All-Party Climate Change Caucus, to continue to work with MPs like Elizabeth May. I will also continue to urge my colleagues to fulfill the commitments we've made in our platform to introduce a zero vehicle emission mandate by 2030, lower industrial emissions, rely more on renewable natural gas, and introduce a low carbon fuel standard. So those are some of the things I'm committed to take action on immediately if I have the opportunity to represent people here again in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Ran. Ran, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Michael, for name dropping Elizabeth May. I feel like this question I've sort of answered a little bit, so I'm going to take a calculated risk and use this time to rebuttal a little bit. I know Michael was going to play the trump card and say that he has an endorsement from David Suzuki, so I'll just address that. You know what, Michael, you're a great guy. You've been our MP for the last 17 years, and I truly believe you are a great advocate for our riding, and I admire you a lot now and growing up in our community. Sorry, I'm a little emotional. I know the main pillars on your poster don't mention climate change, but you've talked about it in the past. But at the end of the day, your party at your last convention, you voted down on recognizing climate change. Your own party refuses to acknowledge it. So despite you being a person that talks about the climate, your first job, if you're elected, is to convince your own colleagues that climate change is real. So sure, I will endorse you too for being the one person to do that. But while you're convincing your caucus colleagues that climate change is real, our country is already on fire. I don't have to convince my Green Party colleagues that climate change is real. We all know which party here has the most progressive, comprehensive plan to combat climate change. My job when I'm elected is to get to work on the climate. My job is going to be working with Halton Hills to meet their 2030 targets, because my job starts here locally first. So thank you for allowing me to answer this question in this way.
Thank you, Ran. Next up, we have Noor. Noor, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for the question. The NDP commits to reducing Canada's emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by 2030. To achieve this, we will eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, we'll put in place carbon budgets, continue carbon pricing, align federal corporations and the Bank of Canada focus on climate priorities like meeting net zero targets and implementing a framework of corporate accountability. We will also create jobs in all regions. We will create over 1 million new good jobs by investing in clean, green energy, by building green infrastructure and requiring the use of Canadian-made steel, aluminum, wood products for infrastructure products. We will ensure that no workers or communities are left behind. We will also change how we get around. We'll help Canadians have access to greener transportation options. We will also power communities carbon-free. In order to meet our ambitious climate targets, New Democrats will establish a new Canadian climate bank that will invest in renewable energy, low-carbon technology, and made-in-Canada manufacturing for green technology. The NDP commits to protecting our land and water, and we also commit to working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Last up, we have Melanie.
Thank you for this. I am very proud to say that the Liberal government has done more to fight climate change than any other government in Canadian history. And these measures that we have started to put in place must be kept in place for there to be an impact on our efforts that we're seeing. Our government has made it very clear. The plans that have been put forward have been endorsed by experts and have outlined the bold and creative and credible plans that have been put in place. The NDP have no credible plan to meet our target. An independent analysis say that their plan is expensive and ineffective. Only the Liberals have the plan that has the determination to have significant improvements over time. Closer to home, if I were to look at where we can have to bring those types of programs and initiatives here that we can see benefit within the riding. As your member of parliament, my focus will be to ensuring that Wellington Halton Hills is a part of the green recovery and that we see those results of those investments made by the government. So for instance, that means we need to help farmers fight climate change and protect our water and land, which is our most precious resources. We need to see more individuals use green retrofit programs that will allow them to recoup up to $5,000. We need to ensure that there are more electric vehicle charging stations so that our residents in our riding feel more comfortable and incentivized to make purchase of zero emission vehicles. And we need to continue to support our businesses, small and large, in our riding, and encourage them to lower their emissions while they create good jobs for our residents. And that's just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. I'll now pass it on over to Margaret for a second question from the community.
Okay, the second question from the community is, what actions will you take to support new forms of transport, employment, infrastructure, and energy? And this time we start with Ran.
So on infrastructure, energy, and employment, I'm glad I can talk about the specifics now. In terms of our fossil fuel, again, the Green Party is categorically opposed to the Trans Mountain oil pipeline and expansion project. We want to end all oil and gas exploration projects, new pipelines, and fracking activity. I addressed this a little bit in my previous answers. We want to facilitate a just transition for fossil fuel workers. We would work with workers and unions to develop retraining and resettlement programs, job guarantees, and income protection tailored to the needs of each province. So that's a little bit on employment. In terms of energy, we want renewable energy, but we don't want nuclear energy. A major ramp up of renewable electricity and an aim of 100% of Canada's electricity should come from renewable sources by 2030. We don't want nuclear energy because it's unsafe. It's not the cleanest alternative. We're also prioritizing investing in a national electric corridor. In terms of transport, now I used to live in Guelph. With Guelph's NPP, we've seen that Guelph Transit is going to transition to a fleet of electric buses. That can happen here in our riding too. The Green Party will ban the sale of all internal combustion engine passenger vehicles by 2030. And we are going to expand charging stations for electric vehicles, including charging stations in smaller communities and rural areas. I've already seen a lot of EVs driving through Georgetown streets, so I'm happy to see those. We're going to develop programs to encourage the retirement of existing gas-powered vehicles. We're going to include government-funded grants for the purchase of new and used electric vehicles and buyback programs to exchange vehicles. I know provincially we had that program. Unfortunately, the Conservative government, the Ford government, canceled that program. So we'll make sure that we're working with provincial governments to reinstate these programs so that we can transition to a greener transportation. That is my answer on the specifics of these sectors, but I'm happy to address any of these questions in further detail should you want to contact me.
Thank you, Ran. And next we will hear from Noor.
Thank you so much for the question. Too many Canadian families are worried about making ends meet, and we need action to create jobs and make life easier. Instead of supporting workers or creating jobs, Justin Trudeau is cutting supports for Canadians who are looking for work while the pandemic is entering a fourth wave. Building up our communities with investments in affordable and energy efficient housing, transportation, and energy infrastructure is what the NDP commits to do. We are going to make products that people want and that Canadians need here, including critical PPE, vaccines, zero emission vehicles, and clean tech. Jugmeet will partner with cities and towns on a transit system that works for Canadians coast to coast. People in cities, towns, and rural areas are tired of waiting for transit that works for them. Liberals have taken no action to help rural communities facing the end of inner city bus service at a time when they need the federal government to step up. We will modernize and expand public transit in communities across Canada with the goal of electrifying transit and other municipal fleets by 2030, as well as introducing fare-free transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. And next we will hear from Melanie.
Thanks so much. I think just before I dive into what I was thinking about sharing, I did want to happily correct just now to say that we actually already have a federal fund that's dedicated to rural transit solutions. So happily that program is already available to communities to be able to use and make investments from. I think on that note, I think it's really important when I think thematically what this question is about, what comes to mind to me is collaborations. And, you know, good policy is good policy, but it remains theoretical if it's not operationalized at the municipal local level. And I think from there, what this requires is a systems thinking approach to ensure that multiple levels of government are working together to ensure that the local programs and projects that would most benefit each individual riding, be it even like an eclectic riding like ours that has small rural communities as well as growing cities, that we truly apply and what's going to make the best lifestyle and living for our residents. The other thing I feel especially excited and passionate about with this notion of collaborations is I've spent my entire career on this. For almost 18 years working at the University of Guelph. My role was very outward, community-faced, economic development, community development oriented, and I spent my entire career creating partnerships and collaborations with those out in the community, be it businesses, not-for-profits, as well as government. And so I feel very encouraged by what we need to do in terms of ensuring that we have the right people around the table as to ensure that the decision making and the solutions are customized to best fit the needs of the constituents who live in the riding. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And now we'll hear from Michael.
Well, thank you, Margaret, for the question. So I'll answer the first part of the question, which I think was about transportation, and the second part of the question, which was about energy. On transportation, I will continue to voice my opposition to the GTA West Corridor Highway, which is a proposed new 400 series highway that would cut through Halton Hills. I do not believe building new 400 series highways is something that gets us closer to our climate change goals, nor do I believe it will relieve congestion. I think Los Angeles and other large American cities proved long ago that building new highways does not relieve congestion. I think we need to continue to make investments into regional and local transit. I support continuing to expand the bidirectionality and the frequency of service on the GO Transit line, and to continuing to ensure that federal investments flow into those stations and into those trains. I support initiatives that we have proposed, such as putting conditions on federal funding for public transit that would mandate increased densification along transit corridors in order to ensure that the ridership levels are sufficient to justify the operational costs and also to reduce emissions and reduce commute times. But the fact is that even in our riding, not everybody can take public transit. And so to that end, the car will be with us for many decades to come. And so we are proposing a zero vehicle emissions mandate that would mandate that by 2030, 30% I should say, just under 1/3 of all new light duty vehicles in Canada must be fully electric. We've got a number of other proposals in the energy sector. We're proposing to view natural gas as a transition fuel as we move to renewable fuels and ensure that we can continue to use Canadian natural gas and export it, particularly to places like Europe, which are in desperate need of it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Michael. Now I'll pass the screen back over to Gemma for a third question before we start the closing remarks.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to our candidates for those answers. When planning this debate, we incorporated some time for any Zoom malfunctions, so we realized we have some extra time to ask one more question from our community. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask the third ranked question that our audience has chosen for tonight. Again, same rules apply. You'll have 2 minutes to answer. This is the question. The past 2 years have brought conversations around colonialism, systemic racism, and white supremacy to our national discourse. What are 3 specific actions that you and your party will take to address the historical injustices that Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color have faced in Canada? First up, we have Noor. Noor, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for the question. I think we need to work on working together as a country. We need to focus on, being more connected. Trudeau talks a lot about racism, but he never does anything about it. No one should be made to feel like they don't belong in our community. Everyone needs to be included. The Liberals have missed opportunity after opportunity to make Canada more inclusive. When we think about last summer, the Prime Minister took a knee and agreed that systemic racism is a problem in every institution in Canada, but he's actually failed to do anything about it. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have a plan to actually address systemic racism by creating a national plan to dismantle far-right extremist and white supremacy organizations, adopting national standards for identifying and reporting hate crimes, countering online hate, and making social media platforms legally responsible for removing hateful content, tackling employment discrimination and the racialized wage gap. Racist hate crimes have tripled since the pandemic began. We need to work on it. Being a woman of color, I still experience racism. I'm 22 years old, and things need to change in Canada. I'm very disappointed.
Thank you for your answer, Noor. Next up, we have Melanie. Melanie, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for this important question and just for highlighting the inequities that far too many people have to endure. One of the initial ideas that I would have certainly is coming to any conversation or interaction from a place of listening, from a place of learning. I realize my privilege in the room, a cisgendered, middle-aged white woman, and I recognize the responsibility that I have in my contribution to conversations and my responsibilities to society. So with that, an initial idea that I have would be certainly to, as an ally, to join the all-party Black Caucus, to look at ways in which that I can learn from what others have had to, the others' lived experiences. Many times I've had to say this to my students over the years whenever they felt as though that a decision that I had to make in the classroom maybe didn't feel right to them. And these individuals didn't realize that, people who come from a place of privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I think we could all stand to pause and reflect on that a little bit, to realize it's not necessarily that we live without, we may not realize the privilege that we live with, but perhaps we need to stop and think about the barriers that we don't encounter. And so I think the only thing that I can bring forward to this, again, in the element of, spirit and essence of collaboration, is just to be a listener and an ally in all of my dealings and interactions.
Thank you, Melanie. Next up, we have Michael. Michael, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for the question. It's an important one. Look, I believe in a Canada where all Canadians, regardless of their race, religion, or creed, are full and equal participants in our society, or have the full opportunities to live the good life without fear, without discrimination, and certainly without fear of being attacked. Unfortunately, that's not always the case in our country. If you look at hate crimes, they've risen significantly in recent years. The number 1 targeted group in Canada remains the Jewish community. The number 2 targeted group remains the Muslim community. And so we have to stand by those communities whenever they are targeted to indicate that it's unacceptable and that we will work together with them to ensure that they have the programs they need to ensure their safety and security, to ensure that law enforcement has the tools and resources it needs to prevent these harms and to provide support. I think the 3 things we can do is first to stand up for that vision for Canada, that goal of our society, that we work toward a more perfect society where people can live their lives without fear, without discrimination. I think the second thing we can do is to ensure that our foreign policy reflects those values. Canada is a beacon to the world, and we have to work to ensure that our foreign policy reflects those values of belief in human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and that we stand up when we see the persecution of minorities such as the Uyghur Muslim minority in Xinjiang province in Western China. I think the third thing we can do is to continue to work with these racialized communities, to listen to them and to ensure that we are responding to their needs. And that's my commitment if I am returned to Ottawa this election. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And last up, we have Ran. Ran, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Despite Canada being a global leader in diversity and being nice, systemic racism does exist. I want to thank Michael and Noor for running, and I want to thank Melanie for acknowledging racism. Creating a just society is one of the 3 main pillars of the Green Party platform. To confront systemic racism in federal public service, we are promising more time and resources for an ongoing review into the Employment Equity Act, which is a law meant to prevent discrimination in federally regulated workplaces. The Green Platform is also calling for expanding the law to cover private businesses, such as temporary agencies that do work for the federal government. The Greens would tackle systemic racism and policing with a comprehensive review of the RCMP aimed at identifying ways to detask and reallocate funds from policing to community and social supports. And third, we will create a new independent police oversight system and a national database of police use of force incidents. To take on identity-based hate, the Greens will promote unity, condemn extremist ideologies, and fund data collection on the spread of online hate and real-world violence. Personally, I will focus on education and diversity initiatives in this community that I love. Our community should reflect the very room we are in tonight, and I want to thank all the candidates for your great answers.
Thank you all for your answers. I'll now pass it on to Margaret to introduce our closing remarks.
Thank you, Gemma. Now it's time for each candidate to present their closing remarks. Each candidate has 2 minutes for these remarks, and we'll keep on with the rotation as we were going along. So we are going to start this time with Melanie. Your closing remarks, please. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So I would just like to open and just thank everyone for our excellent questions tonight, our moderators, our sponsors, and of course those who have signed on this evening. Tonight we've all talked a lot about what our parties intend to do to protect the environment and bring climate change under control. But no matter what, I want us to all keep in mind, climate change is a big challenge, but we can and absolutely should, put in some necessary steps in order to get it under control. We know how to do this, and we know what works. We know carbon pricing brings down emissions, despite what you hear from some parties. And we know that passing the proceeds back to consumers lessens the burden on them while making sure the polluters pay. We know how severe weather will worsen and where the biggest risks are. We know how to adapt our homes and businesses to make them more resilient. We know where we'll need to improve our response when severe weather happens, whether it's boosting firefighter teams or preparing defense on flood-prone rivers. As we move toward a sustainable net zero economy, we already know in broad terms what that economy has to look like. We know we'll need to take measures to make electric vehicles more affordable and expand charging stations. We know the kinds of green jobs we'll need to promote and fund, and we know that Canada's oil and gas workers need to see a future for themselves in a net zero Canada. There are so many different fronts on the fight against climate change and the transition to a green economy, and it can seem like too big of a task, but it's a fight we can win, and the Liberal Party will not only has the best plan for winning it, we also have the will. As your MP, when I get to Ottawa, I won't have to waste time trying to convince my colleagues that climate change is real and that we need to do something. Instead, I'll get right to work as part of a team that knows what needs to be done with a real plan to do it. I hope I can earn your support, and on September 20th, your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And next we will hear from Michael. Michael, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Margaret. Once again, thank you. And thank you, Gemma, the Halton Environmental Network, the Georgetown Federation of University Women for hosting and organizing this debate. This election is a chance for you to have a say. This election is a choice between our current track or a comprehensive Conservative plan to deliver jobs for all Canadians and restore public finances, a plan that will tackle our high levels of debt and unemployment. This election is also about the environment. If you're concerned about the environment, I hope to be your environmental choice in this election. Last election, I was endorsed by GreenPAC for my environmental work. This election, I've been endorsed by David Suzuki. This election is also about who will be Prime Minister. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole is from Ontario, so he understands the challenges we are facing. He grew up in Bowmanville in Durham region, and his dad worked for GM in Oshawa for over 30 years. Both his mom and his stepmom were school teachers. Finally, this election is about which candidate can best represent you in Ottawa. I have the commitment and the experience to advance the issues you have brought up tonight: climate change, the environment, racism, the economic recovery, and so many more issues. But in order for me to work on your behalf, I need your vote. And together, we will do better on the environment, better on building a more just society, better on the economy, and get Canada heading back in the right direction. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you, Michael. And next we are going to hear from Ran. Ran, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you to all the candidates, organizers, and attendees tonight. I'm asking everyone that care about climate change tonight to compare the 4 parties' platforms and know that we have the most bold plan. I have a little prop here to show that under the Green Party, I don't know if it's easy to see. Our party has the most progressive plan and bold plan to reduce GHG emissions. If you want to email me, I'm at ran.zhu@greenparty.ca if you want to see this graph or just ask me any questions about what my views are. I want to close by making a point on advocacy and a point on wasted vote. It's in our Green Party constitution that we don't have a whip. We don't have a whip that tells our MPs how to vote in Parliament because we're elected to be held accountable to our constituents, to our community, and not to our caucus. In fact, when you get elected and you sign your name in Ottawa, you sign your name under your community name, your riding name. It doesn't say Liberal Party of Canada, it doesn't say the Conservative Party of Canada. And I know major parties, they all have whips that tell their MPs how to vote. Even though you can go rogue, you will be penalized for doing so. The Green Party doesn't believe that. I want to vote based on my own conscience and what constituents are telling me. And I also want to make a vote on wasted vote. I hear a lot of people at the door that say, I believe in the climate policies of the Green Party, but I can't vote Green because you will not win. or I have to vote for the party that is going to beat the Conservatives in this riding. And to that I say, if you're strategically voting, don't do it. The only wasted vote is a vote you don't believe in. If you're voting Liberal or NDP to beat the Conservatives, that is wasting your vote because you don't believe in it. Under first past the post, which Prime Minister promised us in 2015 that we are going to see proportional representation, that didn't happen. Under first past the post, it's the only way to make your vote count. It's the only way to send a message, is to vote what you truly believe in. So that's my case on wasting your vote, on not strategically voting. I want to thank you all for coming tonight and listening to us talk. It's just so great to see people being so politically engaged. And I'll end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ran. And now we will hear from Noor. You have 2 minutes, Noor.
Hi, thank you so much. I just want to begin by thanking all the organizers, candidates, and attendees. New Democrats are different because we are working people. For our whole history, we have fought for better working conditions and standards that lift everyone up. New ways of thinking can shape us from the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and help our economy fare and deliver the results we all want. What we have seen over the past 6 years is a Liberal Prime Minister who loves to say the right thing, to promise to address the issue that matter most to Canadians with no intention of delivering them. Liberals have been promising pharmacare and childcare for decades. In May 2020, 15 months ago, Jagmeet Singh called on Justin Trudeau to introduce paid sick leave. He said, provinces need to look at the way to deliver sick leave directly through employers, which the federal government can't do. Mr. Trudeau waited until August 2021 to suddenly admit that the federal can indeed fund paid leave. This is the kind of cynical politics that we must end. We have a Conservative leader where the majority of his caucus contradict him on key social issues every day, and he continues to talk about privatizing your healthcare system, creating a system where the rich can pay to jump line. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have a record for fighting for you, instead of protecting billion-dollar companies that profited off the pandemic but paid no tax. They have fought for you and your family, pushing the Liberal government on supports that helped regular Canadians and small businesses get through the pandemic. Let's not forget, without the help of Jagmeet Singh, the Liberal government wanted to give Canadians about $1,000 per month. On September 20th, I hope that you'll consider electing me as your MP so that I can fight for you every single day. This is my pledge to you. Thank you. If you'd like to get into contact with me, my email is noor.johngear@ndp.ca. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noor. And now, in the name of Halton Environmental Network, the Halton Hills Public Library, and the Canadian Federation of University Women, I would like to thank you for joining this virtual all candidates debate, and to thank the 4 candidates who were able to join us this evening. I wish you all well. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Good night, everyone, and make sure you get out and vote. Bye.